This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up, and welcome to a pregame edition of Q&A, where I not only get to answer your questions, but also get to talk to you guys about the game that's coming up. And if you don't know, I'm going to be live streaming this one. Yeah, no starters are going to be playing, but I will be live streaming. Be your opportunity to come chat, talk Browns with me, and talk about the future of the team and other things. Some of the things to watch going into this preseason game. How much does James Hudson play? Like, does he play? Does he not? Like, that's going to be something that I'm really paying a ton of attention to, because if he plays, it indicates to me that he's not the backup, that they're just trying him out, and that the backup is actually like Hakeem Adeniji or somebody else, or that they're very confident that Jed Wills is going to be back before the end of the season, or at least not the end of the season, before the start of the season, or at least before week 3 of the preseason. If they feel like they have to hold James Hudson out, that would be a little bit more concerning, because that means that James Hudson's probably who's going to be blocking for Deshaun Watson in week 3 of that preseason game. Now, again, week 3 of the preseason game concludes about 2 weeks before the start of the season. So we got a ton of time before we get to the regular season. I think it's important that we remember that we have a ton of time before we get there. I want to see improvement from the defensive line. I want to see them get more pressure than they did last week. I also want to see the Browns' run game actually look like something that can be productive. I've heard nothing in joint practice that is encouraging about this run game as is. I've seen nothing in the preseason that is encouraging about the run game. I need to see them get going, and you want to see them play a relatively clean game from a procedural standpoint. I'm going to be a little bit lenient on that kind of stuff, just because they are switching to a new offense, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, a lot of new processes there, a lot of new techniques that they're learning. So it makes sense that they be a little sloppy right now. That being said, I want to see improvement. I want to see that be better than last week. So that's what I have on my mind going into this Browns preseason game. Let's get to your questions that you had. First one comes from Barrick McDay, who says, Q, my question is, if the Browns have one of the best rosters and the Steelers are near the bottom, can you show me the huge difference? I don't see a wide gap. You don't see a wide gap because I don't think that's what people are saying about the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers don't have one of the worst rosters in football. They just have the worst roster of all of the teams in the AFC North. And like we've said, the AFC North is the toughest division in football, so there is no giant gap between any team in the AFC North from a roster quality standpoint. The Steelers are a team that's going to contend for the playoffs. Every team in the AFC North is a team that's going to contend for the playoffs. So the reason you don't see a big gap there is because a big gap doesn't exist. And I don't think anybody is saying that there's a giant gap between the roster quality of Cleveland and Pittsburgh, or at least anybody who is serious about football talk is saying that. So yeah, there's no wide gap between Pittsburgh and Cleveland's roster because they're both pretty good teams. I think Cleveland has the better roster, but that doesn't mean there's a wide gap there. I think that's a misnomer. Rats95 says, does Kevin Stefanski get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the offensive problems we're hearing and starting out? I think it's important to remember that a lot of what we hear coming out from training camp is exactly that. It's what we hear coming out of training camp. It is somebody's perspective. It is not the same thing as watching the Browns play during the regular season and having an issue of what you're seeing on film. So one, always take what you hear in training camp with a grain of salt, right? No matter who's telling it, no matter how much you trust who's telling you it. Just take it with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean you discount whatever is said. That doesn't mean that talking about football at this point is pointless, but it does mean that you have to take it with the appropriate value of the point of the season that we're at. So that is my first thing. The second thing is, yeah, if there are issues with the offense, Kevin does deserve the benefit of the doubt because the offense has been able to fix itself throughout the course of the year while Kevin's been here. It's been a constant with him. So, yeah, I would give him the benefit of the doubt, but I also would give him the benefit of like, at least let's get to the regular season before we start to panic. And I feel like a lot of people are panicking right now, and there are reasons to be a little concerned. There are things that feel like they're going to be issues during the season. But remember, just because it's not all sunshine and rainbows doesn't mean that the team's going to be bad. It just means that we're getting a realistic picture of what the team's going to struggle with and what they're not. Every team has issues. Every team to ever win a Super Bowl has issues. Don't hear somebody say, hey, look, I don't know if the Browns offensive line is going to be one of the best in the NFL anymore. I feel like they're falling off a little bit. That does not mean that the season's over. That just means that we have identified something about the Browns team that isn't what it used to be. And that means that you're going to have to adjust around that. So just take everything with the appropriate amount of context. I feel like, it's just the end of the summer. It's the start of football season. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are anxious. Like, I feel like the angst is palpable, right? And anytime you hear good news, people freak out. Anytime you hear bad news, people freak out. And it's important to remember to take a deep breath and remember that you're in August and that the Browns play in September. We got time. Even if there are problems, we got time. We're going to be all right. You know what I mean? The next question comes from Dylan, who says this: if Amari Cooper has a season similar to last season and they go to the AFC Championships, if the Browns offer him an extension competitive to other offers, would he sign it or walk to another team? Yeah, I think he would sign it. If the Browns were at the top of the market or close to the top of the market in offers for Amari Cooper and they just went to an AFC Championship game and they want to run it back, I think Amari Cooper would run it back. Amari Cooper likes it here. He likes the connection with Deshaun Watson. I think that's the most important thing when it comes to him wanting to come back. I don't think he's really thinking about location. He's thinking about where he can be the most productive football player and make some money. And if the Browns are offering him a place where he can be very productive, we've seen it. His last 2 years here have been the most productive of his NFL career. Yards in 2023 and in touchdowns in 2021 too. So he has a lot of incentive to stay here in Cleveland with this staff because he's been very productive. And if that continues and he's productive again this year and the team is having huge amounts of success, you will have no problem bringing back Amari Cooper. I promise you that. He is not opposed to the ideal of staying in Cleveland. He's even mentioned that he would like to retire in Cleveland. Yeah, I think Amari would come back in that kind of a scenario if that was the situation. FDBD says, hey, Q, why do we struggle drafting defensive ends? And I'm just going to assume you mean like the entire defensive line because the Browns haven't really drafted that many defensive ends. My theory on this and why the Browns have struggled is pretty simple. Defensive tackle and defensive ends are positions that aren't going to be that deep in the draft. Like, it's kind of like quarterback, not 1-to-1, but it's kind of like quarterback where you have to take the players that you love at those positions. Also, these players take a while to develop. Like, we see Jordan Elliott. Jordan Elliott took like 5 years to become a NFL football player, and now he got a contract with the San Francisco 49ers. The defensive line takes a while to develop. The guys who could play right now are first-round picks, almost always, and the Browns haven't had a ton of first-round picks. I think it's more about where they're spending the resources than how they're spending the resources. When you take chance on third, fourth-round picks at defensive tackle, you're going to get a smorgasbord of results because that position is very hard to project at that point. But if the Browns, I would be more concerned if the Browns were consistently spending first and second-round picks and getting nothing out the defensive tackle position. But, Everything else, I think it has to do with the fact that they allocate their resources on specific positions. And when the Browns do spend a second round pick or a first round pick on a player, it's usually somebody who works out to some various level. So I think it's more about the resource that they're spending than the position that they're picking. And I think that's the truth with most of the draft, to be honest with you, right? We get so caught up in, oh, can they draft wide receivers? Can they draft tight ends? But we never really evaluate where they're drafting wide receivers, where they're drafting tight ends. And the answer might just be that they're not spending first round picks on those positions or second round picks or top 100 picks on those positions. And that's why they don't have the same hit rate, because you're selecting players outside the top 100 at those positions. Might not be about the position, might just be about where they're selecting players in the draft itself. CT Cement with the next question here. And he says, is it concerning to you, even if Jed Wills comes back for week 1, that the continuity of the new offensive line may be lacking because the new offensive line coach, new offensive scheme, missing all of training camp? That's not the concern for me, because if Jed Wills comes back, he's going to be next to Joe Bitonio. Those two have played together the last 4 years. Yeah, it's a new offensive line coach, but a new offensive line coach isn't going to override 4 years of experience playing next to each other. That dynamic is that dynamic, and that dynamic is not likely to change. So I'm not concerned at all about that. Again, Joe Bitonio, Jed Wills, that continuity is there. They can step in whenever and play together. And Jed Wills and Ethan Pocic, they've been playing, not Jed Wills, Ethan Pocic, but Joe Bitonio, Ethan Pocic, they've been playing together for a couple of years. And then even like Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin, if Jack Conklin starts, not really concerned about that, because Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller have a ton of continuity. They played together for 4 years. And then if it's not Jack Conklin that starts and it's DeJuan Jones, they've been practicing with each other and playing with each other the better part of the last year and a quarter. So no, that's not a concern with me. The continuity being lacking is not a concern. My concern is, will this offensive line be able to hold up at a high enough level in a system that puts them more in danger, right? More 5-man protections, more 5 in a chip or 6 in a chip. Like, you're going to be less protected in this system that the Browns are running. Is what they have when they're healthy going to be enough to hold up? I think there's a good argument to say that they'll be just good enough or pretty good. I think there's also an argument to say, hey, I would be very concerned about this. So, we're just going to have to see and let it play out. The Browns offensive line, and I am reminded of this from other people who root for other teams. At the end of the day, the Browns still have a pretty good offensive line. It's just, how good on that spectrum are they going to be when they're healthy? And that's more of the question. But the continuity stuff, not worried about that at all. Jed and Joel be fine playing next to each other. And that's really what the continuity is when you're playing next to these guys. And then like Joel and Jed, and this is another underrated thing that goes into this conversation. Joel has been through so many offensive line coaches too, that there's not anything you're going to throw at him that's going to be new. And Jed is a 4-year vet. He's seen enough to where he'll be able to learn whatever he needs to learn relatively quickly. So I don't think that's the issue there. But thank you for the question, CT. The next question comes from Mark Fears, who says, how seriously do you think the injuries from Coop and David and Njoku from joint practices are? I don't think they're that serious. The Browns are pretty known for being safe about injuries to their core players during camp. So if anything slight happens to those guys, they're going to pull them out of practice and they're going to hold them out for a couple of days after that. That's all it is. I don't think that if this were a game, David Njoku and Amari Cooper wouldn't have returned in those situations. I think they very likely would have returned in a game situation. It's not a game. It's practice in the preseason. So they just pulled them out and played it safe. The Browns are going to play it safe when it comes to injuries. It's kind of how they roll. Chris says, do you see David Njoku having the same success with Deshaun Watson that he had with Flacco? I think a video that would be great for you to watch is my recap or rewatch of the Browns game in week 10 versus the Baltimore Ravens. In that game, I go in and show you on film that the Browns were figuring it out with David Njoku before Joe Flacco got there, right? I think Joe Flacco is the one who reaped the rewards of the Browns figuring it out with David Njoku. But in that Ravens game, you can see that's when the Browns figured out how to use David Njoku. And how you use David Njoku is not that complicated, right? He's not going to be somebody who's going to force your average depth of target to be super long. He's somebody that you want to get the ball in their hands quickly and let them get downhill. The Browns didn't really figure that out till week 10 against Baltimore, and you could see when they figured it out with him, and that was with Deshaun Watson in there. A lot of what Deshaun Watson did in the second half was leaning on David Njoku to do the things that we knew he was going to do when Joe Flacco was out there. So there's already evidence that what the Browns did that was very successful with David Njoku while Joe Flacco was in there, Deshaun Watson was capable of doing it. I just think it was just the Browns figuring out how to use David Njoku, and they figured that out, unfortunately for Deshaun, right when Deshaun Watson got hurt for the year. But you can see it in that game that that's how David Njoku would be used for the rest of the year. And if Deshaun was healthy, he would have used him like that probably for the rest of the year. So that's where I'm at with that. I think Deshaun will be just fine getting the ball to David Njoku because it's not the most complicated way that they use him to get the ball. It's just about figuring it out. JFCA says, out of the 4 QBs they have right now, do you think they'll cut one to make space on the final roster? I'm concerned because the QB room seems solid before. Seems like too much. So best case scenario for these guys, 3 of them make the roster, 1 makes the practice squad. Right now, DTR is outplaying Tyler Huntley. That's what it sounds like in camp, is that DTR is outplaying Tyler Huntley, which means Tyler Huntley could get beat out, and then they can try to put Tyler Huntley on the practice squad. I see Tyler Huntley as PJ Walker plus, right? Like, whenever you got down to PJ Walker last year, this year, if that same thing happens, you would be down to Tyler Huntley. And Tyler Huntley is a better version of PJ Walker. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings or even Baltimore came calling about Tyler Huntley or DTR. Now, I don't think the Browns would trade DTR to Baltimore, but I do think the Browns would trade DTR to Minnesota if the price was right. So they're going to be flexible about this. I think they feel fine with DTR being the 3rd quarterback, and I think they feel fine with Tyler Huntley being the 3rd quarterback. And I do think they'll keep 3. Maybe they try to sneak one on the practice squad, but I just don't think you're going to be able to get away with sneaking DTR, who plays well in the preseason, on the practice squad. And Tyler Huntley is the same exact thing. I don't think you're going to be able to get away with sneaking him on a practice squad. So I do think they're going to want to secure one of those players and make them make the 53. And then, like, maybe 2-3 weeks into the season, when guys aren't looking for quarterbacks, they sneak and cut one of those, the 3rd quarterback, and then sneak them onto the practice squad. But I do think they'll make the initial 53, and they'll make whatever sacrifice they have to make that happen. So yeah, I think 3 will make the initial 53, but effectively it'd be 2 because Jameis will be the only one dressed on game days. But that's how I think it's going to go down. Your average Browns fan says, hey Q, do you ever think that trading Donovan Peoples-Jones was a mistake? Sounds like he's potentially not making the Lions roster. Would prefer him over wide receiver 3, more any other AB pick. He feels like a super cheap option. Should the Browns regret, and I'm just going to use your question. I'm not trying to ridicule you or talk shit. And I'm trying not to be an asshole here, but I'm just reading your question. Do the Browns regret trading somebody? I think they got a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick for DPJ. That sounds like they may get cut by the Detroit Lions. I don't think the answer to that question is yes. I think they are fine with trading Donovan Peoples-Jones. And who knows what led up to that trade? Maybe Donovan Peoples-Jones really wanted to get out of here, right? Once he sensed the wind of things going not his way with Elijah Moore and everything else. I don't think there's really room for Donovan Peoples-Jones. And I disagree. At this point, I would not take him over Elijah Moore. I think Elijah Moore had a really strong year at the end of the last season. But we'll talk about that in a minute. And I think if you're the Browns, why would you give up on a player that you drafted, Cedric Tillman, David Bell, Jamari Thrash, to get a player that you really didn't think much of? You gave him up for a 6th-round pick, and that the Lions don't even think much of. I think the Browns are fine with their wide receiver room, and it's not a bad wide receiver room at all. You could do much worse than what the Browns have here. So, I don't think they think that trading DPJ was a mistake, and I don't think it was either, because it's not like DPJ has provided any value to the Detroit Lions more than like what James Prochet has added to the Browns. Ian says this. Hey, Q, at least in my experience, a lot of people have been hating on Elijah Moore, calling him trash, problems because of his misuse early last year. What do you say to the people? Do you think they were wrong? I think people are a little bit overly negative on Elijah Moore. I think Elijah Moore put together a real strong season at the end of the year. Like, when I go through that rewatch, I'm pretty excited about what Elijah Moore was able to do for the Browns. And I think that Elijah Moore is going to have a healthy role in this offense. So I'm not that down on Elijah Moore. His health has to be a little bit more consistent. I don't think he's been out there consistently at practice. He's kind of just been the forgotten man. It seems like everybody has forgotten about Elijah Moore. I think there's a chance that Elijah Moore ends up being pretty useful for this team, given that, Jerry Jeudy's going to have a role, David Njoku. Like, I think there's a role for Elijah Moore to slide in there, be very productive for this team. That is it for this week's Q&A. You guys have a great day. I'm going to be with you on this live stream in a couple of hours, so make sure you check it out here. Make sure you're subscribed and notified so you don't miss a single notification or a single video. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.